This is Acts chapter 21, verses 27 through to 36. Remember, Paul has gone under the instruction of James and the elders of the church in Jerusalem to go with these four men who wanted to were making a vow. They were going to shave their heads. Expenses had to be paid in the temple. And when the 7 days of the purification were almost over, the Jews from Asia, which is where Paul had established all these churches over the previous probably 5 years, upon seeing him in the temple, began to stir up all the crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, come to our aid. This is the man who preaches to all men everywhere against our people and the law and this place. And besides, he has even brought Greeks into our temple and has defiled the holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with him, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Then all the city was provoked, and the people rushed together, and taking hold of Paul, they dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. While they were seeking to kill him, a report came to the commander of the Roman cohort, and all Jerusalem was in confusion. And at once he took along some soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came up and took hold of him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. And he began asking who he was and what he had done. But among the crowd some were shouting one thing and some another, and when he could not find out the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he got to the stairs, he was carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob, for the multitude of the people kept following them, shouting, "Away with him!" Wow! So Paul has done this thing of going up with these 4 men who had a vow, and he'd been instructed by James and the elders so that things would be quiet. And there's a riot. There's a riot in the place. Some of the Jews from Asia, perhaps from Ephesus, I don't know where, but they were there, and they recognized Paul. And they would have been the people who recognized Paul because they'd seen him many times before. Perhaps many people in Jerusalem, as Paul wandered around, didn't know what he looked like now. And it had been decades since he'd been there. And so there he was. And somebody recognized him and said, "This is Paul. Paul, who's done who's caused riots throughout Asia and Greece, Achaia and Macedonia." And so there's a great riot. They're beating Paul out. They take him out of the temple, and they said that he's defiled the temple because they've seen him around town with a Gentile, assuming that he's gone in with them. He never did, and there's just this great riot. And eventually, after the riot, just like Agabus had said, the man who owns this, what did he say? The man who owns this belt, he says, the man who owns this belt will be bound and handed over to the Gentiles. That's exactly what happened. He was handed over to the Gentiles, and he was bound up with chains he was bound with 2 chains, and they carried him because of the violence of the crowd. They carried him into the barracks for safety. God fulfilled his word that Agabus had said, and here it was happening. And Paul really had done nothing to stir up a riot. It was these men from Asia, who recognized him, who stirred up the riot. And so we have now a long discourse about this trouble that there is in Jerusalem with Paul. It goes on for a number of pages, and we'll read through it. And but it's a significant part, probably about 20% or 25% of the whole of the book of Acts, which talks about the different people that he met and the people he spoke to, and it's a significant part of this book. And we need to understand what the Holy Spirit wants to say to us through these wonderful passages.